Factions play a crucial role in broader world building of any fictional universe. They are the key players that shape the reality of nations and drive the dynamic of a story. Without factions, you end up with a static, lifeless world devoid of any intrigue or conflict. And guilds are one of the most recognizable factions in fantasy. Merchants' guilds, adventurers' guilds, and many other that you can constantly see in RPGs and books and fantasy movies. In today's video, I will guide you to create a compelling, deep guild in your fantasy world. So, what are guilds? Guilds are factions. They are organizations that act like unions or associations of workers of a certain kind. Let me explain. They exist to unify certain type of people. The guild that you are probably the most familiar with is the Merchant Guild. This one is absolutely everywhere. They are the most common type of guilds in RPGs and in quote-unquote generic fantasy. But you can absolutely have guilds of other specializations. Artisan guilds, mercenary guilds, sailor guilds, maybe mason guilds or freemasons, and maybe guilds of artists of certain kind. The goal of a guild is to make a more coherent and unified field for everyone in the area that the guild operate. So let's say a guild of blacksmiths. They would unify, blacksmiths in a city or a town. They would meet, they would discuss issues that they are facing, try to find some solutions for everyone. Maybe there is a shortage of coal, and because of that they cannot make good quality items. So they organize, they make a common budget, they make a fund, and petition some kind of action from the local government. Protesting and fighting for a right as a group is always far more effective than doing that individually. That guild of blacksmiths could grow and buy some property, and then centralize their headquarters. Now with a headquarters established, they could get bigger customers more often. But guilds also have issues. You see, if a guild becomes big enough, they can start to dictate the rules to other people in the field. So if a powerful guild of blacksmiths would arise in a city, then new people who would like to become blacksmiths in that city would struggle because the guild can just gatekeep them. They could even boycott other blacksmiths that are not organized in that guild, and then create weird rules for new blacksmiths to join so the guild would have power over them. That can essentially make a local monopoly. And like with all organizations, if it would grow big enough, a natural hierarchy would form. You would have the most influential blacksmiths on the very top, and they would dictate rules to other ones. Then you would have the medium efficiency blacksmiths that would be good enough to have a good standing in the guild, but not enough to hold power. And then you would have the very bottom of, startup blacksmiths that would just have very little to say, and they would need to pay very big fees for the guild. Those on the top naturally would give the best deals and best customers to their friends, and a natural political landscape would form in it. Not only that, but if there would be two very big guilds in the area, they could become partners and they would gatekeep even more people. Let's say that Blacksmith Guild and a Shipwright Guild would unite and form an Artisan Guild. Now that would create more opportunities for them, but at the same time monopolize and gatekeep people in those fields. And if a guild is big enough, they can also influence politics. Let's take this merged guild now. They would have a monopoly on making ships and producing metal items. What if the city they operate in is a trade port that heavily relies on those two fields? Now those guilds would have a lot to say in local politics. They could bribe their way to the governor and maybe get some exclusive deals, or maybe even get a seat in the governmental council. And the only thing really keeping them from taking control of the city would be lack of military and force. Something that you may not know about guilds is that they actually existed in history, and they very often acted exactly as I described before. They were basically the proto-corporations of medieval times, but they were usually localized in a city or, if big enough, in a region. Now for implementation. Instead of just going on and on and give you just countless examples, Instead, I'll focus on 3 major factors to remember when designing and implementing a guild. First, guilds are a sign of prosperity. They are most likely to be formed in places that are either rich, becoming rich, or used to be rich. If there is a lot of trade and a lot of people, then guilds would make sense to form in those places, to unite these scattered artisans or merchants or whatever the guild represent. Of course, there are guilds that require far more advanced and far richer environments, far more than any other guilds. For example, guilds of artists, of jewel crafters, of marble sculptors. And that is because those things create luxury items. And luxury items are bought by rich people. And in smaller places that are not that rich, there will be not that many rich people. Less customers, and that means less people who do those jobs. Of course, you can go around it and, for example, make a small town but near a diamond mine. So, for example, now this town will have a guild of jewel crafters because the source of their raw materials is just next to them, and that town can just be very popular and would attract rich people to it. So those people will not sell locally. Number 2, guilds are free and independent. One of the major things that is characteristic for a guild is the fact that it is independent of any other factions. It's not related to the state, it's not related to any other governments or any local politicians. It's an individual, independent faction. So a guild cannot really form in a tribalistic society, not only because this society would be poor, but because tribalistic culture would usually not allow for independent faction gathering. Same goes with totalitarian regimes or oppressive governments, because in those societies the political power really do not like competition, and they would not allow for free and independent organizations that could potentially hold some kind of power. And in addition, if a guild already exists in a place that just becomes totalitarian, then that guild would probably just evacuate very quickly, or more realistically, they would be forcefully integrated into the governmental body or whoever is taking charge. Number 3, relationships. Guilds cannot exist in a vacuum. They need relationship with other entities, especially with customers and clients. And the bigger the guild is, the more lucrative deals it can get, the more higher profile customers it can attract. If you watched my video about Thieves Guild and Criminal Undergrounds, you should know that the relationship between guilds and those can either make or break a guild. Because guilds, just like politics, often use those kind of services and can create and help those criminal undergrounds, and they can also be destroyed by them. The same goes with local governments. Their relations with the guild would influence how much power they have in the town. To help you creating guilds, I also prepared a list of questions that you can use whenever you are in the middle of designing them. Is this guild necessary in the place that you are trying to put it in? Like, for example, if you have a port town and you want a mercenary guild, but it's very peaceful, then it's probably not that good of an idea. However, what if there is a rampant piracy and all those merchants who come to this port town and go out, they are always at risk? Then that mercenary guild could make sense to exist, so they can provide services of security. They could help vessels to protect from pirates. How big is the guild? If you already created it, think about how much power that guild can hold, how powerful it is. If that guild is very big and influential in the place you are creating, you also need to remember to create a relationship between the local government and other organizations that exist, maybe some kind of religious order or some big criminal underground. What is the hierarchy of the guild? Does your guild have ranks, or maybe everyone is equal? If your guild have ranks, then maybe think about what does it take to go up the rank. Is there some kind of rulers of the guild? If so, what are the rules? What are the rules to govern the guild? If the guild is governed by some kind of higher ups, then how those higher ups actually ended up being there? Is there a council, or maybe there's like one person who is the leader of the guild? How do the guild protect their interests? Remember that guild exists to further their own goals and the goals of people who belong to the guild. And for that, they need to, well, enforce it somehow. So do they hire security? Do they just sponsor all the politicians? Do they have their own force, or do they hire people to do their bidding? If you can answer all of those questions, then that means your guild is really well designed. There are also a lot of traps and pitfalls that you can fall into when creating guilds, because there's so many guilds in fantasy that you can very easily go into the trope that doesn't make sense. One of the first one that always come to my mind is Adventurers Guild. What even is an Adventurers Guild? Because I actually see this quite often, and whenever I look at the actual job, like what people do in this guild, they just take small jobs like clearing a cave or something and getting paid for it. But there are other people that can do that. There are mercenary guilds, there are bounty hunters, there are people who actually do their job that is related to that specific thing. So when you create a guild, always remember that if you want to create something unique, can someone else do this job? So an adventurers guild that takes deals to eliminate a bunch of goblins would not really make much sense, mostly because this can do a local militia, and if local militia is not doing that, then probably a mercenary group can do that much better, because they are dedicated to that craft. Also, Adventurers Guild has massive implication in a world, because adventuring is not really a job. So if you have adventures in fantasy, that means that this place, this fantasy world, is really well off. It's very rich, it's very peaceful, because those people don't need to do hard jobs just to survive. They just go around and just have adventures. Another big mistake that you can make is what I call the faction mind syndrome. This is actually applicable not only to guilds, but like all factions, but I just forgot about it in my faction video. It's basically when you have faction representatives. So let's say you have a merchant guild, and all people in the merchant guild act the same. They are greedy, they try to scam you, and they all act like some kind of Gestalt hive mind. Remember that guilds are just organization, and like all organization, they are made up of people. And you can have different kinds of people in that organization. And the last one. This one might sound pretty obvious, but hear me out. Do not make quote-unquote evil guilds. Because this is something that I see as well, where people try to make factions evil just by themselves. But if those factions and guilds, for example, are big and they are public, right? A guild is a public thing, then that thing being evil would not really help them with marketing or anything like that. And they usually exist for some reason. If it is quote-unquote evil, it's usually because it is corrupt from the inside. And even if your guild is corrupt from the inside, you can try to show people who are good inside and try to fix it. Humanizing a faction is a great way to make it feel real and deep. If you missed my video on factions, you can check it out, because I actually made this video as a continuation of the faction video. And my next world building guide will also be in the theme of factions. And that is all for now. Please appease the gods of algorithm by commenting and subscribing and liking. See you when I see you.